Quick question for you, Ryan.
Yes, sir.
How many Christmas movies you watched so far this year?
Oh, man. I watched Christmas Vacation over Thanksgiving, and I think that's actually it.
Really?
That's a staple. I'll probably watch some more in the next week or so, get together with family and just chill out and lay
Is
on the
that your
couch.
favorite?
Yeah, I'd say Christmas Vacation's my favorite.
It's a classic.
It's a good.
It's a classic. It seems like all the ones that I like to watch, I remember them being good, but then I watch them again and I'm like, man, that is so good. Christmas Vacation is one of those. I love Christmas with the Cranks. That's
Oh,
a
yeah.
funny one.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I like. Have you ever watched the "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" 1974?
No.
Okay, so it's not a super popular Christmas cartoon. It's like 24 minutes long. You should look it up. You can stream it online for free.
Yeah.
But I think the soundtrack in that cartoon is so good.
Okay.
It's about mice, because in the poem or the book "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," they talk about not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse.
Right. Yeah.
Well, so they kind of incorporate mice into the story about Santa Claus coming to town and a letter that a mouse wrote pissed off Santa. He's not coming to town anymore, and so they have to rectify the relationship.
Right.
So it's good. I mean, you should look it up. It's
That's a
not
great
a super
concept.
well-known Christmas
Yeah.
classic cartoon, but it's one of my favorites, and the soundtrack is spot on.
Yeah.
So
70s Christmas music sung by mice.
yeah, yes,
All right. I
yeah.
like
It's
that.
it's exactly what we need this time of year.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Well, thanks for coming on, man. Ryan McKinnon is our guest today, and so this time of year, there's a lot happening outside of the automotive industry that I think it sometimes distracts from what's happening in auto repair, what's happening in the EV market, what's happening with, I mean, okay, we had an election just over a month ago, and with all of the holiday stuff, it's kind of over our heads. It's forgotten about for a moment, which is nice. You get a little bit of a break mentally from all that stuff, but you still got to keep up with things, because as soon as Christmas is over, the New Year's here and things get rolling. The new administration is going to be in before we know it. Things are going to be signed and changed and all this stuff. And so trying to forecast what may happen is important. And that's why I'm glad that you're here, Ryan, to sort of make sense of some of this stuff with EVs, the NEVI program, and all that. So what's the latest? Where are we at? What is your uh, anticipation of what's going to happen when the Trump administration is in office, and how that looks for EVs next year?
Sure. So I guess the general consensus among folks, and this is not inside information, this is kind of just what everyone's thinking, is that Biden liked EVs, Trump's not so keen on them. That's sort of the shorthand perception, I think. And so because of that, a lot of folks are worried about what will happen if Trump steps into office and undoes some of the policies that might be perceived as being EV friendly that Biden had. And there's legitimate, analysis to be done there. There are consequences for changes in administration. But I think my general message, which we were talking about earlier, would kind of be that so much of this stuff that impacts whether or not your town, businesses in your town put in EV charging stations, is done on a state level. These are policies that are enacted by your state lawmakers, decisions made by the state regulatory bodies, your public utility commissions, your state corporation commissions. Those are the agencies that have the biggest impact and most direct impact on things like getting EV charging stations out there. And so while there's definitely going to be some changes on the federal level and things that do affect sort of the national conversation about EVs, my message to people is always pay attention to what's happening on the state level. Because if you really care about getting EV charging stations out there, or if you're an EV enthusiast and you're worried about the lack of charging stations, or if you don't like EVs and you don't want to see any of your money going to, involuntarily going to help build this network of charging stations, again, that's stuff that happens on the state level for the most part. So that's where you really want to be paying attention.
What about the $7,500 tax credit?
So that's something that I believe Reuters reported earlier in November that Trump was probably going to be consider eliminating that. And we all know that Elon Musk has been a close ally of Trump, and Musk has obviously owns Tesla, but he's expressed support for that as well. So that's something that could definitely impact the sale of EVs, which we saw slow last year, even with that tax credit in place. So taking that away could definitely impact the sale of EVs.
Negatively?
Probably, yeah. I mean, but I think ultimately what all of us who are involved in this space want to see is whether you're talking about the sale of EVs or whether you're talking about businesses building EV charging stations, is to get to that point where it's not reliant on government subsidies and grants and tax credits
Right.
and things like that. And so there's different ways to look at the elimination of a $7,500 tax credit. But at the end of the day, and my expertise in our area focuses on EV charging. It's not so much on EV sales. But with EV charging, what we want to see is a marketplace that is not dependent on outside support. Want to stand on our own, want to be competitive, want to grow organically. And so sometimes that means, cutting off the government support that maybe helped you get to a certain place. And so we don't stand up and scream when that happens. We don't bang our fists on the table calling for more money or for calling it for it to end. We will take advantage of the opportunities that we have, but ultimately we want to see a marketplace that can stay on its.
It's kind of like moving out of mom and dad's house.
A little bit, yeah.
At some point, it's got to happen, and most of the time when it does, you're not fully ready financially, but sometimes you got to take that hit, learn how to grow on your own, make a living for yourself, and usually it turns out better for you.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just came up with that. Boom. Light bulb moment.
Well, I mean, because honestly, in the EV charging marketplace, it's a little bit of a weird dynamic because with the Biden administration, there has been a strong level of federal support for EV charging. So the Biden administration signed into law the NEVI program, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, with the goal to get thousands and thousands of EV charging stations all over America, situated right alongside the highway with high-speed EV chargers, with the idea being that sort of if you build it, they will come. If we have those in place, more and more people will feel comfortable buying EVs. It'll model itself after the gas station model, where, when you're driving in your internal combustion engine car, you're never worried about, am I going to run out of gas and not have access to a gas station? So there was a lot of public support for it. And our coalition, Charge Ahead Partnership, has a lot of gas stations as members. And our members benefited significantly from the NEVI program. A lot of them were able to apply for grants and get a large chunk of money from the government to help offset the cost of building and installing an EV charging station. So that program was helpful. That program did raise the profile of the need for a nationwide network of EV charging stations. But at the same time, it's not like our members looked at that as being the only way they could survive or the only way they could get into the marketplace. They looked at it as an opportunity and they took advantage of it where they could. But the NEVI program itself has been really slowly deployed. You probably heard about it during the election cycle. I mean, I think Trump talked about it during the Republican National Convention. He relatively inaccurately stated he spent $9 billion on 8 EV charging stations, which it's kind of an exaggeration, but his point stands that they spent a ton of money and they've only at this point deployed.
Right.
I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it's less than 200 EV chargers.
Well, you and I talked about that last time.
Yeah, that's right. So a poster child for a slow government program. Even in California, where they love EVs and, it's a very EV friendly state and there's a ton of EVs and they need EV charging stations, they still don't have a NEVI station built.
Right.
So this is a program that Trump has said he wants to claw back the money from, all the money that hasn't already been allocated. He wants to bring that back and cut off the funding for that. And again, that's not something our members are looking at as a catastrophic loss for their marketplace, because relatively speaking, I mean, it was a fine idea, but that program is not going to fund a nationwide EV charging network. I mean, you think about how much it costs to build one EV charging station, giving each state, you know, 30 million, $50 million, whatever, each state got different amounts to build charging stations is only going to go so far. And like I was saying, this needs to become a marketplace that can stand on its own and isn't dependent on these government grants in order to survive.
I wasn't aware that the Trump administration was considering taking back the money that's not been used.
So it's a little complicated. So basically, the program, each state had to submit a plan that was approved by the federal government, and then each January, the Federal Highway Administration goes in and approves that fiscal year's plan. And so they typically do that in January. So if they do that before Trump takes office, then there would be the first 3 years of money would have been approved. So that money basically is sent out to the states, and those states have that money. That money can't get pulled back,
right?
Because that's already in the states, even if the states haven't used it. Because there's states like Florida that have basically all but said, hey, we're not going to give this out. Florida still hasn't issued an RFP for anyone who wants that money. They're just sitting on it. So that money has been dispersed, and that can go towards building EV charging stations. However, it's a 5-year plan, and so there was 2 years that still have not been allocated. And so I think when Trump is talking about clawing back unused funds, that is the money that would be most susceptible.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of news around EVs, EV charging this year, and there was a lot of steam and excitement for EVs going into the year, but the market, the charging stations just have not improved and grown the way that they needed to, and for a lot of reasons. But there was even this year, didn't the California put out a mandate that it's since been retracted, that by 2035, all cars made within the state were supposed to be EVs, something like that? Did you read into that?
All new cars. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's been rescinded. And this is my opinion. I think before EVs really need to grow and be a large percentage of the cars being made, I think there's got to be more chargers. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if suddenly all of a sudden we had all these EVs getting produced and people purchasing these EVs and that market was growing, I mean, the charging system as it stands now could not manage that.
Right. And something that a lot of folks don't get is because they'll look at, they'll see the news nationally about how there are these, grant programs like NEVI to give businesses money that want to put in EV charging stations. And they'll see, even if EV sales aren't what they were projected to be, they're still growing every year. There's still more and more people buying EVs each year than did the year before. So it's still a growing marketplace.
Right.
And so people will wonder, well, maybe people just don't like EVs, or maybe gas stations feel threatened by them, and so they don't want to offer EV charging. The truth is that businesses like gas stations or convenience stores or grocery stores or existing retailers are ideally suited to offer EV charging. They have the locations, they're in the prime spots, but many of them aren't going to do that because of state energy policy problems that are in states all across the country, red states, blue states. In most states, there's not a rate structure for selling the electricity that's used to charge EVs.
Yeah.
So that means that if you're an entrepreneur and you buy an EV charging station, you want to sell electricity to customers, you're subject to antiquated rates that were established way before EVs existed that are going to land you with a gigantic power bill at the end of the month if you try to sell that electricity.
So that needs to be fixed first.
That's something that retailers and entrepreneurs and businesses across the country have been pounding on the table about, saying we need a rate structure that makes sense for selling this product if you want us to be able to sell this product. And you see the effect of those bad policies all over the country, where so many states' EV charging markets are being propped up by grant-funded chargers, by tax rebate programs. Basically, someone's like, well, there's no real way to make money in this marketplace, so the only way I can do it is if I get a charger for free. And then I don't really have a big incentive to maintain it or to make sure that it's in the best location. And so what you see all over the country is government subsidized chargers or public utility subsidized chargers being put in weird locations. Nobody uses them, then they break.
Hmm.
We just saw this in Maryland. Maryland had a 5-year program where they allowed the electric utilities to use ratepayer funds to build a huge network of charging stations. Nobody used them. Tons of them broke, and they just ended the program this year. And so that's just an example of what's happening all over the country, where there's these businesses that want to offer EV charging, and we keep talking about we need more EV chargers. We won't have the EVs we need until we have the charging stations. The reason people aren't building charging stations is because there's no rate structure that they can depend on, where they know, like, if you're selling gas, hey, I bought it for this much per gallon. I'm able to sell it for this much per gallon. These are my costs. This is my markup.
Right.
You know how much you can reasonably project what your profit will be.
Mm-hmm.
That's what businesses need if they're going to get into this space. But with EV charging, there's no way to reasonably predict what your profit is going to be, because so many of the charging rate structures are, like I said, they predate EV charging, and they leave retailers with a gigantic power bill at the end.
Do you think the Trump administration cares about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a business problem.
Do you think that's
It's
something
really
that they'll try to? I mean, I'm not sure where it would be on the priority list, but something they would try to work on to get something so that can get started?
That's something that needs to be done on a state by state level. That's really what the state regulatory,
right,
the bodies that oversee the public utilities.
Yeah.
That's something that they need to fix. There's no real federal fix to that.
So what does someone listening or watching do? Write the representative? How can they help move this process to where the states move it up their priority list?
Sure. So if you're listening to this, and if this is resonating with you, I guess, and I'm not just trying to promote our organization, but I'm part of Charge Ahead Partnership, and we literally, like, what we do is we keep folks engaged, because every state is different. And so you might live in Georgia and have an issue, or you live in Maine, you have an issue. It's not going to be the same answer. So our organization, Charge Ahead Partnership, is a good way for you to get engaged in that and learn about what's going on in your state and how you can advocate for policies that make sense. Speaking broadly, what folks can do is talk to your lawmakers, especially those who are involved in energy policy, and encourage them to pass legislation that would require the state regulatory body to enact rate structures that work for EV charging. So it looks slightly different in every state, and I can just sort of try to sum it up for you here quickly. A lot of states, the power companies, they will apply demand charges to folks who are selling EV charging. And so a demand charge is based on how much electricity you're using at any given point during a billing cycle. And so it's typically something like $8 per kilowatt hour. So if you have let's say you have 4 150 kW chargers at your location, and 4 people pull in and use them at once, that's 600 kilowatts of power being pulled. If you have a $7 per unit fee on that, that's $4,200 right there, just for 4 people using your chargers at once. So that's just a really quick oversimplified example of how unpredictable it can be to sell this product, because you could get unlucky, have 4 people use your chargers at once, it spikes your usage, and that's a $4,000 bill right there on your power bill. Man. There's no way you charge those 4 customers enough to cover that. You're not charge them $1,000 each. So, And again, I'm kind of butchering this. It's a really complicated topic, which is why it's kind of tough to get people involved. So I'm simplifying it as much as possible. But essentially, that's the problem in a nutshell, is that it's these antiquated rate structures that were developed before EV charging existed and make it really tough for anyone to predict what their profit is going to be or turn a profit selling this product.
And just like every new technology, new system that has to go through approvals and government oversight, it takes a while. So, I mean, even though that's a huge need, it could fall down the pecking order a little bit. And so let's say there is a structure for these rates that is made within the next year or two. Then you can start to build. Then it becomes profitable for EV charging stations, whoever decides to do that. I mean, we're probably talking about, a decade here between the moment we're talking now and when the market can actually sustain more EVs on the road. Could that happen sooner, or is that like a good ballpark? I mean,
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, I think it's an interesting problem because, like we talked about, it's a state level issue, and so you're going to have some states that might have very forward thinking rate structures
yeah,
and make a friendly business environment, and so you see a lot of EV charging stations pop up in those states. But for high speed charging, you're really trying to serve the long distance traveler, someone who's driving on the interstate. It's
right.
not really for in town charging at this point, just because most people who are driving around town will plug in when they get home.
Yeah,
So high speed charging is targeting the long distance traveler. Let's say, Georgia just passed some really positive legislation the past couple of years that make it a much more business friendly environment for folks who want to offer EV charging. But if the states around them, Florida does not. And so it's tough for businesses in Georgia to invest in EV charging stations that are going to be along the interstate because they know so much of the traffic going through on these long distance travels, is up and down
true.
95, is headed to Florida. So that's just a kind of simple example of, maybe it's 85 that goes through Georgia, but regardless, these interstate, they're dependent on the long distance travelers.
Yeah.
And so you want to see lots of states in an area develop these policies that are welcoming to EV charging, and that's when you really start to see the needle move on investment.
So it's going to just take them working together, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's essentially it's raising awareness about the need. It's
Right.
saying, hey, we're trying to address. We got root level issues. We got deep issues that we got to fix first before we just keep giving everyone money for charging stations or allow the utilities to build charging stations. We need to fix these fundamental business problems with the marketplace on a state by state level in order to spur the growth that we're talking about. It's not going to be fixed by, one president coming in and giving billions of dollars charging stations, the next one taking away, like that's all a distraction. What we really need to focus on is these fundamental business issues.
Yeah. And, okay, so a lot of folks still believe 100% in ICE. And ICE, doing well and will for a while. And so a lot of the people in that area are just totally against EVs, and that may damage and slow down the process some too. So give me your perspective on EVs, how they can work together with ICE vehicles, and because it almost seems like two sides, like two different teams, and they're pulling against each other sometimes. But I believe, just like you're talking about with states that need to work together to move this forward, I think the automotive industry as a whole, even repair, could work together a little more, because if one thing gets better because they are connected, I think that improves the other side. And I don't think we really get that. So what's your perspective on that? Am I right?
Yeah, and I think gas stations are a good kind of microcosm of what working together looks like, where a lot of our members are gas stations, and sometimes we get people who assume that they hate EVs because their business is selling gas, which is that's a fair assumption to make. But the truth is that gas stations see EVs as a great opportunity. They see them like, hey, everyone that buys an EV is a potential lost customer. So as more and more people buy EVs, I want to get a charging station so I can serve those customers and keep them, because I know
you want to be able to serve both.
Exactly. Yeah. They want to be able to, they don't, honestly, we talk to our members and people think that we are big oil. We're not big oil. We are fuel agnostic. We don't care what you power your car with. We just want to sell it to you. I mean, these are, gas stations are businesses. They want to sell what the customer's buying. I think some of that resentment towards EVs you're talking about is fueled when states do things like what I just described Maryland doing, where they raise your grandma's power bill. She's never going to own an EV. She'll probably never even ride an EV. Right. So she's paying more on her monthly power bill so that the power company can build a network of charging stations that they have no incentive to maintain. They don't lose money if people don't use them. And so they fall into disrepair, and then 5 years later, the program's killed. Yeah. That type of thing makes just your average Joe resent EVs and think, this is stupid. My tax dollars are going to this. My power bill is going to this. I don't have an EV, so why am I paying for all this? I don't think ultimately that's helpful. What we want
Yeah.
is a marketplace where folks can invest, where, our members, they're willing to risk their own money. They say, hey, I see 15 Teslas driving down past my station. I want to get a charger so I can serve those people and have them come charge up, and then also buy a sandwich at my store, and buy a snack and coffee. And so I think
Yeah.
the more free market toward approach we can get, the less resentment there'll be towards this new technology.
So obviously your organization tried to raise awareness for this stuff and help advocate for people in the EV sector, in the automotive industry, to help move things forward. That's fantastic. But when you do your research, when you talk to your folks, like what's your perspective for the future, 2025 coming up? Is there optimism? And tell me, kind of what your view is of the incoming administration and what that may look like if we were to sit down a year from now. What could we be talking about that changed?
I hate to sound like a broken record because I wish I had some good analysis on how the entire industry feels about the administration. But like I've been saying, like some states feel great, some states feel less hopeful, because this just comes down to the states. I will say the NEVI program, if that goes away, I think some of our members will be disappointed at the loss of opportunity to get that grant funding, because it is a big startup cost to put in an EV charging station. But like I said, we don't feel like that's going to be catastrophic to the marketplace.
Right.
That's just kind of like the cherry on top in terms of, I don't know what the right analogy is, but that's just $7.5 billion is a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money when it comes to building a nationwide network of charging stations.
Right.
It's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah. Anything else that you think is important to share?
I would encourage folks, if they've watched this long, then they're definitely interested in EV policy, or they just enjoy hearing from you, Braxton. So,
well, it's probably the first one.
So if you are interested in EV charging policy, Charge Up Partnership is an advocacy organization. We are working to expand the nation's charging network, really pushing for free market policies that would enable all sorts of folks to get into this market. Our members are all competitors. They're all competing with each other constantly. So we're not trying to, tilt the scales in favor of one group or another. We're really just advocating for a free marketplace where folks can stake their money and fail or fly. It really just is up to them. And so, like I've been saying, that comes down to getting these state level policies fixed, because that's really where the story is. And it's helpful when folks like you are curious about this and when reporters understand it, because way too often we act like the president is, our dad who's going to fix all our problems and is going to, make EVs everywhere, make EVs go away. And the truth is that this is so much more complicated than that.
Right. Well, thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Braxton. Always enjoy coming on.
So this is where you come in. If you're listening or watching this video right now, take a moment and share the video, share the podcast on your social media channel. If you're watching the YouTube, give us a like, subscription, and that'll help other people. That's how the YouTube algorithm works. More people that like, more people see it. So if you can do that, other people will see this content and be educated and hopefully be more interested in what's going to happen next year and how you and me can actually make an impact in the EV market coming up with our state legislation and helping out people like Ryan. So share the video, share the podcast, let folks know about it. And if you're on YouTube or listening on Spotify, you can comment below with your thoughts, other interesting anecdotes that you know about that maybe I should. And I'd love to hear of other guest opportunities as well. So that is where you fit in right now on this video or the podcast. Get involved in those ways. And just like we were talking about, with states working together, with the automotive industry working together, if we can do that today together, we're going to help the industry move forward. And that's what this episode and this podcast is all about. So thanks for checking us out. Appreciate you.